Tonight on this special edition of Race to the Wire, Mitt Romney took Arizona, Michigan, and Wyoming already this week. But what about Washington State? We'll give you an in-depth preview of this Saturday's Republican caucus with analysis from King 5 political reporter Robert Mack and reporter Molly Ball from The Atlantic. Plus, outwit, outplay, outlast. No, we're not talking about a reality show, but the race for the GOP nomination.
I've said from the very beginning, this is an episode of Survivor. We just need to stay on the island, not get voted off.
Political commentator Ron Reagan breaks down why the longer this race goes, the worse it could be for Republicans. And later, he said, what?
Trying to figure out how to design some kind of picture of what does Obama baloney look like.
Our political experts Kathy Gill and Paul Guppy look at how a candidate's message tumbles out of context by going viral online.
Well, joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Marty Cady, congressional editor for Politico.
CNN's political editor Paul Steinhaus.
Molly Ball, reporter for The Atlantic. Well, Romney's all but wrapped up the nomination, but you got primary season still going on. Is he going to be able to unite Republicans by the end of this?
Yeah, I think there's two people in this country who think there's still a Republican primary going on, and their names are Newt Gingrich and Ron Paul. And some days I'm not sure if they even believe it.
I'm joined now by constitutional scholar David Adler, who's the director of the Andrus Center for Public Policy at Boise State University.
There's a great deal of anti-federal governmental attitude and noise here in Idaho.
Well, joining us now to talk Oregon politics is political analyst Len Bergstein, King 5 political reporter Robert Mack.
Gromer Jeffers with the Dallas Morning News. Emily Schulteis, the national political reporter for Politico.
Political reporter Felicia Sonmez from the Washington Post. Well, to help break this down, I'm joined now by Dave Ross and Luke Burbank from the Ross and Burbank Show on 97.3 FM.
The president has a bunch of reluctant supporters of his own, right. People like me who voted for him and sort of expected big stuff. And now we look at it and we wonder why he hasn't, sort of been stronger about his support for gay marriage and the decriminalization of marijuana and a lot of things like that.
I'm joined by well-known liberal commentator Ron Reagan, and he said that he might quote your dad with the line that most people will remember now, there you go again, if he catches President Obama in what he considers to be lies or untruths. Is that going to be effective for him?
He better be very careful using that line in a debate.
And I'm joined now by conservative talk show host Michael Medved. Can he deliver on bipartisanship? Everyone talks a big game during the campaign, but can he do it?
Sure. It's a very big challenge right now because the country is polarized. But the truth of the matter is that he did do it in Massachusetts. He had a record as an executive.
Veteran political reporter Anita Kasey, the host of TVW's weekly public affairs news show, The Impact. Politico senior Washington correspondent Jonathan Allen. Joining me now is Dave Shemwell, the creator of pro-Romney super PAC Pivot Point Washington.
We've started a surrogate campaign, basically, to take the place of the absence of the national campaigns in the state.
We're joined now by our team of political analysts, Paul Guppy and Kathy Gill. Paul is vice president for research at the Washington Policy Center and spent 12 years as a congressional staffer. And Kathy instructs students at the University of Washington in digital media. If you could prognosticate what is going to be the October surprise. Any thoughts on that?
So get out our crystal ball?
Yeah. Our crystal ball? Pull it out.
We are the citizens of Washington. We will decide for ourselves.
Tonight on a special edition of Race to the Wire, top issues and races from across the Northwest take center stage, some with controversy in tow.
Did you punch her? I tried to explain to the very best of my memory what happened that night.
We have the new details that put a candidate for Portland mayor back on defense, with analysis from political strategist Len Bergstein. Plus,
Hold it right there, Rob McKenna.
The ad battle heats up in the race for governor of Washington State. Robert Mack has more on that as our political team of Paul Guppy and Kathy Gill preview a big upcoming debate. Also,
the question is good enough?
A fiery debate over education reform turns heads in Idaho. The latest on the controversial Students Come First ballot issues. This is NWCN's Race to the Wire.
You've talked about a division on this issue among the religious community. What kind of impact could that have on Election Day?
Well, gosh, it really comes down to voter turnout. That's always the big question. And this one is very, very close. We're talking about 4 percentage points that separate the two. And the no side's actually been increasing in the last couple of weeks. So it could be very interesting. But what this has done, it's really divided the religious community. Washington tends not necessarily to be a church-going state, but there's a religious foundation that a lot of people have. That's what each side is sort of relying on and appealing to in some of the ads that we've seen. Really just wanting people to concentrate on what the Bible says. It's interesting, though, because I had 2 people on my show. I had a pastor and I had a rabbi, and both of them were looking at the same Old Testament and getting different viewpoints.
Over the years, there have been specific issues on which the Seattle Times has used the power of its editorial page to promote its view, from affirmative action and Initiative 200 to net neutrality. Now comes the same-sex marriage referendum, and this is the first time, though, the newspaper is adding a social media campaign. It started over the weekend. The Times posted its editorial urging an approve vote on same-sex marriage. Then the Times printed a sign and asked its readers to take a picture of themselves with that sign.
But the top headliner maker of the night comes to us from Portland, Oregon, where mayoral candidate Jefferson Smith went on the defensive again over a 1993 assault incident. Last week, Smith said back in college he got into a scuffle with an 18-year-old woman at a party in what he called self-defense. The incident was settled out of court, but police reports reveal the woman said Smith punched her in the eye. We also learned Smith visited her last week to apologize and worried about her name getting released.
Len, at this point, maybe it's an understatement to say things aren't going the way that Jefferson Smith planned, right? Can he recover from this assault story?
Well, I think he can. I think he can recover. Oregonians, like Washington voters, I think, like to give a person a second chance. But the worst thing possible is happening, and that is the story continues to just drip out, and each week it seems to be another twist and turn to the story, which is a politician's or an office seeker's worst nightmare. So he's got to really get this behind him and start talking about issues that voters would care about in order for him to have a chance to have a comeback in this election.
The Idaho battles right now fit within the context of great discussions and debates across the nation.
Prop 1 ensures parents have input on teacher and principal job performances.
True. The law says annual teacher evaluations call for, quote, input from parents and guardians. Critics agree it's in the law, but say the ad is showcasing a very small part of Prop 1.
A very small aspect of that law is, in fact, that the parents will have a voice in that.
I think there's a lot about these reforms that are very desirable, but as a parent and as a spokesman for this new group, I can say that that is one of the parts that we think is the most desirable and why Idahoans should vote yes in November.
Prop 1 also limits negotiated agreements between teachers and districts and ends renewable contracts.
This election has turned into a referendum on Tom Luna, hence the use of the term Luna laws in reference to these measures. And the reality is that many Republicans are staying out of the limelight on this issue. Perhaps they're not interested in associating themselves so closely with the superintendent, given the unpopularity of these measures.
3 states right now are looking to legalize medical marijuana. The other 3, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, are taking it a step further, trying to. From the latest polls, there is support for it in both Colorado and Washington, not so much in Oregon.
I don't like it personally, but it's time for a conversation about legalizing marijuana.
Let's face it, demand for marijuana isn't going anywhere.
Washington's I-502 and Oregon's Measure 80 would decriminalize pot. Both states are taking a similar approach with specific rules on who can grow, who can sell, and who can use. Among the similarities, growers and sellers would have to get special permits. The marijuana would have to meet certain criteria for quality and potency. You'd have to be at least 21 to buy, sell, or smoke it. A special commission would be set up in Oregon, and Washington's Liquor Control Board would take on a new role to regulate every step. The backers point to what could be a big financial boost for both states. Measure 80 cuts most of the $60 million Oregon spends each year on cannabis enforcement, and supporters say it could raise an additional $120 million a year. In Washington, the latest figures point to $1.9 billion over 5 years. But there are some major differences, too. Oregon's law would create a distinction between marijuana and hemp and actually use some revenue to promote the hemp industry for fuel, food, and clothing. Washington's law would set a THC blood limit for drivers with strict penalties for anyone caught over the limit or not agreeing to a blood draw.
We want to touch on the Columbia River crossing. Big story there, not affecting just Oregon and Washington, but according to Washington Senator Maria Cantwell, it affects the entire nation. Is this an issue that candidates on each side of the border can take a stand on and win with voters?
Good question. The Washington delegation, Maria Cantwell, of course, and Patty Murray have got such enormous clout in the United States Congress to kind of fritter that away and not be able to take advantage of money that could fix a major infrastructure, a big road and bridge problem, would be a terrible loss for Oregon and Washington. We have a lot of problems on the Oregon side with trying to figure out what kind of bridge makes the most sense. Governor Kitzhaber is committed to make this happen, and he's got to try and get the Oregon legislature to pony up some money in a very difficult session. So it's going to be a very tough sell, but there are a bunch of politicians who have got their reputations on the line that want to deliver some kind of solution across the Columbia.
Idaho has become Mitt Romney's home away from home. He's visited this state very, very frequently over the last several years. By my count, some 7 appearances here in this most recent election cycle.
The race for governor in Washington state promises to come right down to the wire, something voters here are quite familiar with. To that end, we brought in each candidate, Democrat Jay Inslee and Republican Rob McKenna, and asked them each the same 5 questions. Mr. Inslee won a coin flip to answer first, and we alternate responses from there on out. The first question is on jobs. The jobless rate dropped to 8.5% in September, but just 1,200 jobs were added. What immediate steps would you take as governor to restore jobs to pre-recession levels?
Well, I'm going to use both my experience and my vision for job creation in the state of Washington. And I have an economic development plan that has 75 very specific proposals that will make sure that we build jobs in the industries where we know we can compete.
I don't think there's any problem that affects a family more than having someone lose a job. Long-term unemployment is one of the worst anxieties a family can experience. I remember when I was in high school, my dad had gotten out of the military, struggled to find that first job in the midst of a recession, then got laid off from it. It was a really tough time, and I always remember how that feels. So I went out and talked to over 400 small business owners in the state. I asked them, what do you need to be in a position to create more jobs? And they all said, it's too expensive to do business here.
Actually, he sounded a lot like Romney there. Jobs will fix things. Jobs will fix things. I think voters are skeptical. I would like to think voters are skeptical of no specifics.
Inslee strikes me as someone who's running for Congress. I mean, he gives those general overall points. It's as if he's, and maybe he's comfortable with this, is running for an office which is legislative rather than executive. What I noticed with McKenna is that he's almost too, he's called a policy wonk, but he's a master of detail. He understands the issues in Olympia.
I'm joined now by polling expert Stuart Elway, president of Elway Research Incorporated. Stuart began gathering and analyzing public opinion across the Northwest back in 1975 and publishes the only nonpartisan and ongoing analysis of public opinion trends in Washington state. Thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about, in a general aspect, of how close things are this election cycle in Washington state.
Things are close. We polled last weekend on 5 candidate races in Washington state and 4 ballot issues. Nobody's over 50%.
Same-sex marriage referendum, you got a poll that shows a slight advantage for supporters. What are the numbers telling you at this point?
A few years ago, when R71, the similar measure was on the ballot, similar survey at this point, and we had them ahead by 5. They end up winning by 6. This one's ahead by 4. Inside the numbers there, support for referendum 74 goes down with age. That is, the older you are, the more likely you are, less likely you are to support it.
Right.
Which is going to have some be impacted by turnout because younger voters are less likely to turn out. So,
gotcha. But for a numbers guy, this has got to be a lot of fun to keep track of things.
This is a 10 aspirin survey here, I'll tell you.
Tonight on Race to the Wire, we put you in the driver's seat. Viewers join us live in a Google Plus Hangout, Facebook, and Twitter for an interactive look at this election season. We want to head over to Rob from Bremerton now. He also has a question for our guest, Dwight Peltz. So what do you say, Rob?
Thanks for hanging with us, Dwight. I was curious if what Rob McKenna was going to be to Washington State like Mitt Romney was to Massachusetts.
Well, Mitt Romney was elected governor, and Rob McKenna won't be, so that's one big distinction there. You know, we're trying to draw attention to the sort of the Rob, Romney, Ryan trio because we think these three have a lot in common. Fast talkers with a lot of ideas that we don't think are good for your family.
We've got an example here from Charlotte who asked via the NWCN Facebook page, why is Ron Paul not going to be a speaker at the RNC?
I don't know. If it was up to me, I would allow him to speak because he's a candidate. He had a fair amount of support. That's a decision that's made by the Republican National Committee. And if it were up to me, I would let Ron Paul speak. He represents a significant portion of the party, and I think he should be heard from.
Here you see the Washington State Elections Facebook page, and the app is there. You click on it, and within a few seconds, depending on your browser speed, you'll launch the app. And from on this screen here, you are basically giving permission to use some of your Facebook profile information to begin or to log into My Vote. So you can see here that what Facebook did is it passed your name and date of birth onto the login screen or the My Vote screen to get started. Now, when you're interacting with the system here, you're not interacting with Facebook anymore. You are interacting with our system. Your data is coming to us, not Facebook. What our system does then is it takes a look to see if you're already registered. Is there someone with your name and date of birth already registered to vote? If there's not, you'll get this message here that says it doesn't look like you're registered to vote. Would you like to?
Even as people are watching us on television, the greatest new phenomenon right now is this notion of second screen, that anybody who's got a smart device or a tablet or a cell phone are actually expressing themselves even as they're watching us on television. In fact, Nielsen says 88% of people who've got these devices are doing it while they're watching television. And so one of the cool new applications for that is an application called ZBox, and this is the one that NBC is using right now. And you can click on the various tags that people are referring to, and you can see the kind of conversations they're having over certain subjects, even as they're watching television election coverage. On top of that, in terms of social and mobile devices, Instagram has really come to the fore during this election. After Hurricane Sandy, when it was really used a lot to cover what was going on there in the Northeast, people are using Instagram to take pictures of their ballots to show that they voted, which is great, but in certain states, you're actually not allowed to use electronic recording devices, so they're being warned off in terms of using that.
The Seattle hip-hop duo Macklemore and Ryan Lewis waded into the same-sex marriage debate with a new song and video. It's already had about 3 million YouTube views in just a week.
If I was gay, I would think hip-hop hates me. Have you read the YouTube comments lately?
The song and video Same Love features the story of a gay couple in support of Referendum 74. After the show, be sure to log on to the NWCN Politics page to watch gubernatorial candidate Rob McKenna dancing Gangnam Style. For more on one moment that's setting the internet on fire from last night, we turn over to Ed Muir in the Northwest Tech Center for us. Ed?
Yeah, Rob, earlier we heard David Adler speak about President Obama's comment after Mitt Romney said that the Navy has fewer ships now than in 1917. Let's hear a little bit more about what President Obama had to say on that.
But I think Governor Romney maybe hasn't spent enough time looking at how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets because the nature of our military has changed. We have these things called aircraft carriers where planes land on them.
Horses and bayonets, that became the phrase of the night, and almost immediately that lit up the internet. It became the top Google search term of the night, followed by Syria, Mali, and drones. And according to the Wall Street Journal, horses and bayonets was the most tweeted moment of the debate, generating 106,000 tweets per minute. And put that in perspective, the most tweeted moment from the second debate was Mitt Romney's binders full of women. That generated nearly 110,000 tweets per minute, and much more than the Big Bird, which was tweeted only 17,000 times per minute after the first debate. Now, here are some more memorable tweets that included the hashtag horses and bayonets. Democratic Representative Ed Markey of Massachusetts wrote, Romney's 1917 military plan matches his 1917 energy plan. And Rich tweeted, my great-grandfather was a U.S. cavalryman in World War I. we have his bayonet if the government needs it back. And much like the binders full of women comment, Horses and Bayonet also got its own Tumblr. There are several memes popping up on the website, including one that shows the one-liners from all three debates. You see Big Bird riding a horse, carrying a bayonet, and a binder full of women. All right, so that brings us now to our Facebook poll on the NWCN Facebook page. Go on there now and vote your answer to this question. Which one-liner is the most memorable from the presidential debates? You can share your thoughts on Twitter as well as at NWCN. And we'll check in with results and reactions in about 10 minutes. And before I leave you, Rob, one last little note. The U.S. military does actually still use bayonets. They learn it during martial arts training.
I'm used to people saying something that's not always true, but just keep on repeating it and ultimately hoping I'll believe it.
Tonight on Race to the Wire, mission accomplished for Team Romney in the Mile High City, his big debate performance, and the new attack plan by the Obama campaign.
Thank goodness somebody is finally getting tough on Big Bird. It's about time. We didn't know that Big Bird was driving the federal deficit.
We're joined by Sue Turner from Washington, D.C. for analysis from the Capitol, and conservative talk show host Michael Medved. Plus,
Obamacare is on my list. I apologize, Mr. President. I use that term with all respect, by the way. Good.
The healthcare debate resurfaces. Hear from the Northwest doctor who says neither candidate can fix the system. And Joe Biden, sex symbol? Politico's Jonathan Allen talks about his eyebrow-raising article and the bipartisan issue brought up during the debate. This is NWCN's Race to the Wire.
Good evening, I'm Rob Piercy. 24 hours after the first debate and 33 days until the election, the presidential race took a turn many didn't see coming. By now, you've probably heard 67% of voters in a CNN post-debate poll gave Romney the win. You wrote this morning about the debate, and here's what you said. You said that people can't refer to Mitt Romney as mittens anymore. People have to call him boxing gloves. Do you really think that he's turned a page here, or at least the perception is that he's turned a page?
Well, I think so, and it's not that Romney has changed so much. It's just this is the biggest stage. People have really been paying attention to this. He was pretty tough against Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum in the Republican debates, but here against the President of the United States, who seemed uncomfortable, languid, hesitant, he wished to be almost anywhere else, Mitt was having a good time. And that's one of the things I learned in speech class in 8th grade, which is you can win almost any debate if you look like you're enjoying it. And Mitt did, Obama didn't.
49 days until Election Day, and a secretly taped fundraiser video has the entire nation talking about Mitt Romney and the presidential race. Taped back in May, that video shows the Republican candidate calling 47% of the country dependent on the government.
At the least, this is a big distraction last week and this week. They want the message to be the economy, jobs, 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 but they keep getting pulled away from that message to deal with this.
We asked if you thought the country was too dependent on federal government. More than 70% of you said yes. Some of you tweeted your thoughts as well, including at Jofi's Girl, who said, way too dependent. People need to take responsibility for them and theirs.
I think he's doing too much of a detailed analysis. Most candidates, they talk about people who are in need, the unemployed, growing businesses, talking about the economy. They use general terms, or people who are retired and on Social Security. So general terms to talk about groups of voters without necessarily giving them a percentage number.
Do you believe that they are good for the democracy of this nation? Do you think they're, I mean, obviously it benefits you, but if you had your choice, if there were no super PACs versus super PACs, what would you choose?
The super PAC is an artifact of campaign finance reform. I believe that conversation is beneficial to democracy. And because of the nature of financial campaign reform, in order to have those conversations, people have had to organize into these groups called PACs and super PACs. So I would prefer they didn't exist at all. I would prefer the free exchange of ideas.
The most potency the super PACs may have is in the states where that are not in contention, particularly in the presidential race. Let's say the state of Washington, which is supposed to be an Obama state. If one of these super PACs on the left or the right comes in with a ton of money, let's say in the governor's race or a Senate or House race, whatever, and tries to swing that election to their side, just under a flood of advertising at the last minute, that might be effective. We won't know about that until the last minute.
Foreign policy is a hot topic. Polls indicate the president has the upper hand, the advantage. Most voters think he would do a better job than Mitt Romney on foreign policy, but it is in the news, and Romney has been using every chance possible to attack the president.
During the darkness of the storm, I think we also saw what's brightest in America.
Tonight on Race to the Wire, in the face of catastrophe, the election shifts out of the spotlight.
We have heavy hearts, as you know, with all the suffering going on in a major part of our country.
See how each campaign reacted to the storm-related disaster, with analysis on how this affects the race going forward.
You point to a very simple premise as the real problem with health care, and that's skyrocketing costs. But you don't believe Obamacare nor the Ryan plan will actually fix this.
Well, I don't think either plan taken in its full measure will fix it. I don't think either plan actually directly attacks the problem. We in our healthcare discussions have been off target. We talk about the uninsured, and the uninsured are clearly a huge problem, but you can insure everyone, and that's not going to reduce costs.
I'm amazed at, how resilient people are.
In the United States, we have never missed a national election day. During Civil War, the Depression, the Second World War, we have always made this date and held an election on this day.
A lot of focus on the Northwest, that is for sure. I chatted with a friend in Kansas tonight. She's also a journalist. Washington's marijuana law is getting a lot of attention.
Some mixed emotions. The Washington State Democrats' election headquarters office got broken into earlier this morning. That did not stop Jay Inslee, though, from hitting the streets this afternoon.
He's running against one of the weakest Democrats they put up in decades. I also think he's run statewide a couple times. He's raised the money. It's in a situation where he should have a good shot at this. But any Democrat rolls out of bed in Washington State about 8 points ahead, just rolling out of bed.
Sadly, there's a long, not proud history of voter fraud in our country that goes back pretty far. But today, in answer to your question, there is much more sensitivity about it. There's more accuracy and oversight, which is good.
Oregon's going to be a reliably blue state on most of the races. Reliably, I think, fairly status quo on a bunch of the ballot measures.
When people do exit polls, they say that the economy is the #1 issue. But as the Twitter feeds would tell you, the #1 issue amongst Washington and Oregon voters, for those who are supporting Barack Obama, are gay rights. For those supporting Mitt Romney in Washington, it's terrorism. For those in Oregon, it's education. And in Idaho, for those who support Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, both of them put environment as #1 on their list.
CNN is now projecting the Republican Party will remain in control of the House of Representatives. That is pretty much as was expected. But the battle for control of the U.S. Senate is still going on in the trenches.
Idaho voters, they have their hands full this election cycle. They're voting on perhaps 3 of the most controversial items on any Northwest ballot, Propositions 1, 2, and 3.
You should know that, in fact, it's this issue that now has become the most expensive issue in Idaho's electoral history. Some $6 million have been spent on these propositions.
You're looking right now at the Electoral College map. The math would still be in President Obama's favor. Needed 270 electoral votes to win. He has 274 by the current count.
Here's what he just tweeted: 4 more years, with the picture of him and the First Lady hugging. And then there was also, we're all in this together. That's how we campaigned, and that's who we are. And this happened because of you. Thank you. An interesting note is that Mitt Romney's team has not tweeted in over 6 hours.
Obama getting reelected, that sort of showed up on the screens. That was greeted by a smattering of boos. And then you saw some early numbers which showed Rob McKenna ahead and gay marriage failing, so people started to get recharged, and then those numbers turned around a little bit, and there's been a little bit of that sort of took the air out of the room.
He had said that he had only written 1 speech, but clearly the speech had been prepared sometime within the last couple of hours here as it became more evident that President Obama would win a second term.
Yeah, at this point, President Obama has won every swing state except for North Carolina. Florida is still not called.
One that is passing at this point but not called is R-74. This is similar in Maine and Maryland, too. I don't think any of them has been called at this point.
It's been an enjoyable evening, a long evening if you've stuck with us all these hours. We appreciate you watching.